The Marine Corps requires leaders of all ranks to have a deep understanding of war and the employment of force. MCDP 1 reminds Marines that the military profession is a thinking profession. Every Marine is expected to be a student of the art and science of war. It goes on to say that every Marine has an individual responsibility to study the profession of arms. Self directed study in the art and science of war is at least equal in importance to maintaining physical condition and should receive at least equal time. The Marine Corps Association understands the critical importance of ensuring that Marines are as mentally ready for combat as they are physically ready. That is why we offer an entire page dedicated to wargaming on our website. We have recommendations for both tabletop board games as well as computer games. And for Marine Corps Association members, there is a discount code for War Game Design Studios that you can find on the website. War games are a great way to immerse yourself in history and to put yourself in the shoes of the great leaders of history. Go beyond guided instruction and experience the thrill of wargaming. Check us out at mca-marines.org/decision-making-exercises/wargaming-2. That's mca-marines.org/decision-making-exercises/wargaming-2. Take your training to the next level. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners, this is episode 178. This week, we continue our Road to 250 segment, celebrating the Marine Corps' 250th birthday in 2025. Over the next year, we'll feature stories and history from throughout the 250 years of the Marine Corps. These episodes will be nested within the MCA's overall Road to 250 campaign, where you will find featured articles in both the Gazette and Leatherneck, highlighting events and battles within the specific periods in Marine Corps history. The MCA also has a commemorative Road to 250 coin collection. These commemorative challenge coins can only be found through the MCA. Go to marineshop.net to order individual coins or email customer service at mca-marines.org to pre-order the entire set or learn more. This month, we walked the road to 250 with Paul Westermeyer, talking the grand old man of the Marine Corps, Archibald Henderson. Paul is a historian at History Division and a subject matter expert on the details of Archibald Henderson's 5 decades in the Marine Corps, 38 of which were as commandant. Paul helps us dive deep into Archibald Henderson's legacy and the historical context surrounding his accession through the ranks to eventually becoming commandant. Here is episode 178. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Thank you for joining us and your continued support. I'm Vic. I'm here with Nancy.
Hey, everyone. Hey, Vic.
Hey, Nancy. How are you doing? How's the holidays treating you?
Good. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good, thanks.
I mixed it up a little bit.
Yeah, no, you totally did. It caught me off guard. I like it. Yeah, it was a little weird coming into work for the first time in a few days. So.
And the roads were clear. That's the weirdest part.
That was awesome.
Yeah,
that was awesome. So here we are, and luckily the roads were clear because then I was able to speed down to my office for this interview. Who we have Paul Westermeyer in studio today. He's a historian at History Division. Paul, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, this is so great. So for anyone who read the show description, which is probably just me, the one who writes it.
I always read it.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I try to support.
We are into our Marine Corps Road to 250 campaign. For anybody who's been paying attention, we talk Continental Marines, we talk Barbary Wars, and today we are going to talk the grand old man of the Marine Corps, Archibald Henderson, and we are going to take some deep dives into his lineage, his time, his many, many decades in the Marine Corps, and why it is that buildings are named after him, and why he is the grand old man of the Marine Corps. And we have our subject matter expert, Paul, here to sort of dissect that for us. But before we jump into the grand old man, Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself. So you're a former Marine.
Yes, I was 0311.
Oh!
I served with 3-2.
Okay.
In the early 90s, I am the proverbial terminal Lance.
Right. So, what made you want to join the Marine? Where did you come out of? I guess. Where did you?
Well,
recruit out of?
I was born in Ohio.
Okay.
But my family came over from Germany
Oh,
in
nice.
1950, and my father and both of his brothers, my uncles, they all served in the 1960s.
Okay.
And late 50s.
So it was just sort of. So
Well-
there were no pants shitting when you said, "Hey, I'm going to boot camp."
Well, I said I was going to be a Marine when I was 5.
Oh,
so-
nice.
Determined.
Yeah, well, I was always interested in the military, in the Marine Corps specifically, in the family tradition. Though in the end, I was the only one in my generation who did go into the Corps. Though I have several cousins
Okay.
who went into the Army. But yeah, so I always knew I wanted to be a Marine. And I also was always very interested in military history. I went to Norwich University for a
right.
couple of years and Ohio State, and then I served my time in the Corps. Then I went back to Ohio State, where I got my finished up my bachelor's, and then I got a master's degree in military history there. At the time, and today still. Well, at that time, Ohio State was bar none the best military history program in the country. And it's still a very, very good program. There are a couple other programs now that have come forward and are really pushing hard, but Ohio State is still top notch. And then I worked on my PhD, but in the end, for various family reasons, I didn't finish it. I ended up as an all but dissertation cliche. Part of what happened was shortly after 9/11, I got an opportunity while I was still in grad school to take a job as a contract historian down at Special Operations Command.
Oh, cool.
And
Down in Tampa.
yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
and this had happened shortly after 9/11, and as I'm sure you remember, a lot of us were looking for ways to serve again if we
Yeah.
had served earlier.
Yeah.
And this looked like an excellent way to do that. And it also, my job prospects, I had been teaching for 9 years as an adjunct faculty at various universities and community colleges, and I loved teaching. But this was a full-time job versus
Yeah.
putting together 3 or 4 part-time jobs.
Sure.
And so I took it. It didn't work out. But I was down there for about a year, and that got me the resume qualifications in addition to my schooling and my teaching experiences, so that in 2005 I was able to get hired at the Marine Corps History Division as a permanent GS employee.
Okay.
historian.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
so-
we're happy to have you over here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is great. And then what's sort of your focus area within History Division?
Well, it's very interesting. Originally, I had planned to teach Western civilization. And I
Okay.
had a focus on military history, but I had a focus on ancient and medieval military history.
Oh, interesting.
I had been a Marine, and as I said, I was always a big fan of like World War II and so forth, but my professional interest had been in antiquity.
Okay.
So when I came to History Division, I had to pull up some old grad school papers I'd done on the Gulf War because right away my boss said, "You're going to write the official history of Marines in the Gulf War," which worked out well. I was in the Marine Corps during the Gulf War. I did not go to the Gulf War, but because I was in during the Gulf War, I really understood the
Yeah,
Marine
you had
Corps
the
of that
context.
time.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, totally.
But I also had some distance. I didn't really have a dog in the fight as far as controversies and so forth. So I really enjoyed that, and that was my first major project. I wrote a battle study on the Battle of Khafji, and then I wrote the History Division major official history, liberating Kuwait. Since then, I've done works on Afghanistan, the legacy of Bella Wood.
No, interesting.
I did a book on American naval strategy and American naval power, um, and how the Marine Corps fits into that.
Hmm.
Um, Now I'm currently working on several projects. One is that for the 250th, the History Division is doing a large joint project. We're producing a broad history of the Marine Corps, the first 250 years, which we will have complete, ready, and hopefully published by the birthday coming up for
Yep.
the 250th. Um, and we're really excited about this project. We see it.
Absolutely.
We want to produce a book that hopefully we can convince the Corps to give to every recruit and candidate at boot camp and OCS.
Oh,
so that
nice.
to take with them when they leave.
Yeah, sort of the entry level training
Yes,
stuff. Yeah.
exactly. So that's something that the division or history branch. I work for the histories branch. We write the books for the history division. There's archives branch and histories branch. That's our major 250th project, and we're really excited about it. And like I said, we're all working on that as a team. The other project that I've been working on for many years now is a second major official history, Marines in the Frigate Navy from 1798 to 1859. And that's almost finished, though we had to pause it while we finish up the 250th, but hopefully it'll be out within a year or three. And I'm really excited about that
That's
project
cool.
as well.
That is very cool. Yeah, and it's interesting, as we have talked, we've sort of taken deep dives within these various eras leading up to, Archibald Henderson, as we've seen the impact of this frigate navy, sort of necessity being the mother of invention, right? And so, not necessarily having the infrastructure to build massive man of war type ships and being able to very quickly convert these smaller, more agile, and then which then leads to innovation in tactics and strategy and employment methods and things of that nature. And I think, without going down too big of a rabbit hole too soon, is now we're looking at, as we're entering in, or as we're fully into now, peer and near peer great power competition, and we see our adversaries creating these massive ships with all this technology and stuff, and now we're looking at, well, how do we get smaller? Kind of like, I'm a massive Star Wars nerd. Like, how do you attack the Death Star? Well, you can't build a bigger Death Star, so let's just send a bunch of little fighters after it, and all I have to do is avoid their turbo lasers.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, thank you.
I
Thank you
think
very
that
much.
might be our first Star Wars reference on the show.
If I could afford
I'm
it,
gonna
I would
make a note.
I would splice in the clip, like, their fighters are avoiding our turbo lasers. Anyways, go. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that's important to keep in mind, and Henderson, who we're going to get to later, is wonderful for this because in many ways, he's the heart and soul of the frigate Navy Marine Corps. But the reason we have this idea of a frigate Navy Marine Corps is because the Marine Corps fulfills a specific function in 18th and 19th 19th century naval warfare. The Marines are an integral weapon system on these vessels. So when you look at naval warfare in this time period, what is it composed of? How does it occur? Well, they're sailing ships. Now that's specific. They're not, for the most part, galleys. They're not oared. Those still exist, but they are now limited to very specific locations. The Mediterranean, the Caribbean, regions that have relatively calm waters, and where they can expect to find a port because a galley has such a huge crew that it has to land every night. It just can't carry food and water for long distances. They have ship rigging. Ship rigging matters because, and what I mean by that is they have a mix of square sails and lateen sails so that they can sail very quickly with the wind and also sail somewhat close to the wind, right? So the wind always blows in a certain direction. And being able to sail as close as possible against that is important for your maneuverability. A lot of landsmen don't realize a naval vessel, a sailing vessel, that can be literally caught between the wind and the shore and destroyed with no way out, simply because the wind is just blowing you onto the rocks. And you can't, we're used to today turning an engine on and steering the direction we want to go. Sailing ships don't work that way. Everything's geometrical, right? To go to point A, you have to navigate towards point X, hoping that the wind from direction Y is going to properly drive you there.
Gotcha.
So everything is in a geometric, everything is slow. Naval battles could take 5 or 6 hours, but of that 5 or 6 hours, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 5 minutes is actual fighting.
Really?
Right.
The
Wow.
rest of the time is maneuvering into position. So you very seldom are immediately surprised, though sometimes you are. Also, like if you take a map of the world and you plot where naval battles are, they always occur in the same places, because naval battles, their location is determined by geography, by where ships go, and where ships go where they go, not from random factors, but where humans are, where resources are, right? And that affects a lot of things that we're going to see in this period.
Well, it sounds to you then, if these engagements are really, sort of brief and violent, then accuracy and economy of force was huge.
No.
No, really. It seems like if you've only got 5 to 15 minutes, then you can't really spend a lot of
Because
time
it's virtually
missing, right?
impossible.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. Now, when they talk about accuracy, like, for example, when the Shannon defeated the Chesapeake in the War of 1812, the Shannon was known as this wonderful gunnery vessel. And she was. She was one of the best gunnery vessels that the British had at the time. Her captain was considered an expert on gunnery. He had done everything in his power to make her like that. And the reason she succeeds is because, not because she hits like 95% of the time or she's super skilled, but because her crews are very, very fast. They fire a lot of shells quickly.
So they have a higher
They get
chance
close.
yeah.
You get close and pound into each other. Long range, accurate fire is not going to occur. It is going to occur in the frigate Navy period. It's going to occur during Henderson's time period. And we'll talk about the technology.
Yeah, because that's one of the things I want to get into, because he was so big on discipline.
Rifling is what happens there.
I see.
And that's going to change the Marine Corps, because as I said, the Marines are a weapon system, right? But what weapon system are they? They don't man the guns.
Right.
The Marines' job is basically threefold. Their most important purpose is to maintain order and discipline on the ship. Sailing is a highly skilled profession. And so what that means is, when you fight the enemy, most of the time, after the battle, you just take his sailors into your crew. So your crews are made up of people from all over the world.
Interesting.
Right? Now, sometimes the fighting gets so heavy that stops, right? Like the Napoleonic Wars, the French and the British, the hatred becomes so fierce that they kind of stop doing that. But generally speaking, you do that. So your ship's crew, and this is true for the United States, the idea that sailors have no country. If they have no country, then they're not particularly loyal to your Navy.
Right.
Now, the U.S. Navy, that's a change, and we'll talk about that again under Henderson. But that's why navies of the 18th and 19th century have Marines, is because they don't trust their sailors. So the Marines are there to
That's
make
the soundbite from this podcast right
to
here.
make sure that the sailors don't
It's our t-shirt.
mutiny, so that they don't rise up and kill the officers. Right? The mutiny on the Bounty.
Yeah.
Now, though the Bounty is not a great example, but there's nuances to all of this. But that's the primary reason the Marines are there. They reinforce the authority of the ship's officers. The other thing that they do, and this is the weapon systems aspect, the other two things, there's really three. So I guess they have four functions now that I think about it, is they provide small arms fire.
Yeah.
This is just like today, if you see a Navy ship that's got machine guns to ward off suicide boats or boarders. The thing to remember, these ships are all made of wood.
Mm-hmm.
Wood is very hard to sink because it floats intrinsically, right? So even after you blast all the masts off, you still may not capture the ship. And the go-to move, you got to get close to shoot each other, is if you're losing the gun duel, you come in close and you try to board.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, if you're losing the gun duel, you probably lost more men, so then you're probably going to lose that also. But boarding is the key. And the Marines were there to stop the boarders, and they stopped them in different ways. One is small arms fire, the musketry. Today, the Marine Corps likes to focus on, we're accurate. The Marines of that day weren't accurate. Nobody firing a musket on an 18th century ship is accurate, right? It's a wing and a prayer that you're going to hit anything. The reputation for Marine riflemanship is something that we develop in the 20th century, at the beginning of the 20th century. And what does it is the Marines say, you know what? We really think Marines should be great marksmen. How can we achieve that? And somebody has the absolutely brilliant idea of saying, you know what? I bet if we pay the guys who are really good shots more each month, all the Marines will become really good shots. And that's exactly what happens. They add expert marksman pay, and the Marine Corps marksmanship becomes legendary.
That's hilarious.
Miraculous.
Yeah, because what does more pay bring you? More beer.
It's right.
That's what motivates Marines. So, but during this time period, even though we like to push it, they're not super accurate. They're firing a musket, which is smoothbore, from a moving platform at another moving platform. And also black powder is inherently unstable and difficult to predict. So that's one aspect, but mass fire. They are trying to kill enemy officers. That's their main target. Nelson was famously shot by a French Marine at the Battle of Trafalgar, for example. The other thing that they do is, of course, they provide stiffening to the sailors. The Marines will literally take a formation on the deck. The sailors aren't trained to fight in formations. But during this time period, you do better if you fight in a formation.
Sure.
Line abreast, if you know to stay there. Bayonet drill.
Mm-hmm.
The sailors don't fight with bayonets. They fight with boarding pikes, axes, knives, maybe pistols. The Marines have their muskets and bayonets, and their job is not so much to seize the enemy ship as to hold their territory on their ship. In other words, to hold their deck. Now, they do also board the enemy ships. And in battle after battle, especially in the War of 1812, we see the American Marines holding firm against these British boarding parties. And the Marines are often the last guys fighting. In the Chesapeake, the Marines are the last guys fighting before the Shannon finally wins that battle. One of the few frigate duels that the British win. Most of them the Americans win. Though that's beyond the scope of today's discussion. So, and then the final thing that the Marines provide is a landing party, because you need to project power ashore. You can shoot ashore with your cannon,
right?
But that only
holding
goes
ground.
it only goes so far too. You can only shoot 400 yards. It's when you consider that you probably are lucky to get within 50 yards of the beach. Maybe 350. You need to be able to influence more than 350 yards of land if you want to do anything. So the Marines are trained soldiers, not just trained sailors. And so they can go ashore and they can occupy land and control it. So that the Marines are thus very functional. We don't have a Marine Corps because of some whim. We have a Marine Corps because when the Continental Congress and then later the U.S. Congress sits down to create navies, they say, well, if we're going to have a navy, you got to have Marines. Now, I could get more into this, but Generally speaking, that doesn't mean you have to have a Marine Corps, right? You
Yeah.
could just as easily have a regiment in the Army that's assigned to be Marines. And that's what the British used to have. And the reason they don't is because of the English Civil War and the hatred of standing armies, right? They get rid of the Marines, become a separate corps that are part of the Navy. You've noticed there's a Royal Navy, but not
Yeah.
a Royal Army in Britain.
Mm.
That's because of the conflict between the king and Parliament and dislike of standing armies. Well, that carries over to the United States, not explicitly. I mean, yes, our hatred of standing armies carries over, but we have a Marine Corps because the British had a Marine Corps for about 50 years
Yeah.
when we create ours. And the British have the best Navy in the world. So if we're going to create a Navy, we just do what they did. And so we just bring that over. But so that's what we have at the start. That's that Marine Corps that provides the people who do those duties. That's the Marine Corps that Henderson, I know we haven't started talking about him, but we're going to.
Well, we've definitely been talking around it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is good.
That's the Marine Corps that Henderson becomes a Marine officer in. That's the Marine Corps he grows up with. But that's not the Marine Corps that's in 1750 or in 1859 when he died.
Yeah.
Yeah, when he dies in 1859.
Right. I mean, because you said he completely transforms.
Which,
it.
by the way, is why I end my book, Marines in the Frigate Navy, in 1859. I actually ended in January of 1859 with the death of Henderson. And then a few months later, we have the Harper's Ferry.
Right.
And that'll
Yeah.
be the next book, Marines in the Steam Navy.
Nice.
Yeah. So I guess as we're sort of tiptoeing around it, the U.S. military that Archibald Henderson comes into, that's coming out of the War of 1812. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so,
Well, Henderson is already a Marine. In fact, Henderson is famous and is able to become commandant because of his actions as a Marine officer in the War of 1812.
as a
So-
junior officer, right? Is
Well,
like
he's
fairly,
no, he's
is
not
he
really,
fairly senior?
he's pretty senior
Okay.
for the Marine Corps. You have to remember at the time, the Marine Corps does have a lieutenant colonel. I don't think they even have a major. They may have, technically they had a major, but he dies. And he probably would have been commandant instead of Henderson, Carmick. I presented a paper called The Commandant Who Might Have Been. Carmick was one of the first Marine officers appointed in 1798. So he's senior
I
to
see.
Henderson. What's fascinating about Carmick is that his career is focused. Well, early on in the Quasi War, the first war we fight, he is involved in it as an officer with at sea. So he does have time at sea, which is an important factor for judging early Marine officers. Do you command Marines on a frigate or a brig at sea?
Mm-hmm.
He does have that. But most of his career after that, most of his career in between the Quasi War and the War of 1812 is in New Orleans. He's basically when the Louisiana Purchase happens, Jefferson decides he needs to send some federal troops there. Well, Jefferson, the Jeffersonian Republicans, they hate the army. They don't want a central army. They're very agrarian, very southern. Armies are bad. Armies are royal. Armies are central. Armies are federalist. So no army. But on the other hand, oops, I've gone and doubled the size of the United States, and I need to send something there, troops. So what he decides to do is send Marines. So he decides he's going to send a battalion of Marines, which doesn't exist, and in fact never exists. Though they do end up sending around 100, 120 or so Marines, and they send Carmick, who at that time is one of the senior Marine officers. He's a captain. And they send Carmick to command the Marine barracks that they get established at New Orleans.
Okay.
And these Marines. And so Carmick is at New Orleans from 1806 or so on, off and on. He comes back and so forth. But he's involved in, unfortunately, putting down some slave rebellions. But he's very involved with the Army officers. Wilkinson, who turns out to have been a traitor in the pay of the Spanish the whole time. but he was also the senior general in the U.S. Army, and for a while the governor of this territory. Um,
Who's on the take?
yeah, well, for the Spanish, yeah. So anyway, Carmick, because he's in New Orleans, where he's working primarily with the governor, who's often an army officer, he tends to favor cooperating with the army. And Marine officers, they really have nowhere to go, right? Once you're a captain, the only thing left is commandant. Well, there's only one commandant. And you can't become a general. Right. Henderson will eventually, but that's a long way in the future. So what do? Right? Army officers can become, have the chances for promotion. So Marines, and remember the Corps hasn't even existed 10 years yet. There's not massive amounts of loyalty. Though Carmick does show loyalty. It's remarkable, actually, how much loyalty to the Corps these early officers develop right away. And you can see it in their letters. But he's still out for himself. Mm-hmm. And he wants to get promoted. He wants to get fame and so forth. But he works mostly with Army officers. And there's some conflict between him and Wharton, the commandant, especially when the War of 1812 breaks out, because Carmick wants to be assigned. He either wants to be assigned to like one of the big frigates where he can make a reputation for himself, or he wants to be kind of said, hey, yeah, you can become an officer in the Army, essentially. Or you can keep your Marine rank, but, work for the Army. And Wharton's like, you got to keep a... We only work for the Army when the president orders us to, not, Yeah. But Carmick ends up working very much with the Army. He commands the Marines there. And when, in 1815, during... 1814, 1815, Carmick is the senior Marine officer in New Orleans during the New Orleans campaign. And so under Andrew Jackson, Carmick is a major. He's the only major in the Marine Corps at the time. He's one of the senior officers and most experienced officers that Jackson has in New Orleans. And so Jackson puts him in charge of Plachet's battalion of New Orleans militia. Plachet's the commander, but he doesn't have any military experience. He's a New Orleans citizen. And Carmick is given basically operational command. That's what we would call it today. And so Carmick commands that militia. He gives command of his Marines to his second captain, and the Marines fight well. There are, a lot of people think of New Orleans as one battle, but it's actually 4 different battles and multiple skirmishes. And in one of these battles, a nighttime assault by the British, sort of a testing of the American defenses, Carmick is hit by a Congreve rocket, one of those rockets that fire on Fort McKinley. It hits him and his horse, the whole rocket.
Wow.
Jeez.
He survives, but he's very heavily wounded, and he dies in 1816 of his wounds. So that's how come. But if Carmick had not died,
he's probably
he becomes commandant because he has the most seniority.
Right.
And that seniority thing is important to keep in mind as we look at how Henderson becomes commandant and so forth.
Yeah, let's get into that a little bit. So we had talked a little bit in the pre-show that because there were other, at least according to Marine Corps mythology, other famous officers that had come before, Presley O'Bannon being one of them. You had mentioned that Presley O'Bannon's time doesn't really overlap very much.
He gets out. O'Bannon gets out shortly after he returns. It's important to remember, again, that Jefferson, I imply that he likes the Marine Corps, and maybe he does, I don't know. But the Jeffersonian Republicans don't want to spend money, and they don't want a military. Yet they keep pulling us into wars. So...
Classic.
Yeah, Jefferson is the one who starts the Barbary Wars, but, he's slashed the Navy to virtually nothing. And he doesn't want a Navy at all. Later on, after the War of 1812, he writes a letter to his famous rival,
John Adams?
John Adams, yes, thank you. Telling him, I was wrong about the Navy.
Oh, yeah.
You were right on the Navy, I was wrong. But... Yeah, it's remarkable because Jefferson like doesn't want to pay the Barbary pirates, but he also doesn't want to pay for a navy. I sometimes, well, you know, I think it's a lot of privilege. Jefferson thought things should just happen for him. I'm not a big fan of Jefferson, as you might have
I could
guessed.
tell, yeah.
But so he's cutting the navy, and after the first Barbary War ends, the navy gets cut dramatically, and therefore the Marine Corps gets cut. And so O'Bannon realizes there's really nowhere for him to go, and so he leaves the Corps.
Again, leaving an opportunity, right, for
Well,
Archibald
it
Henderson.
does. Somebody else
Yeah.
comes up, but not really, because the rest of the Corps is shrinking. So instead, there's it doesn't create the opportunity that you would think it would.
So where do you think then that Archibald Henderson starts to get his, I guess, to use a, when does he start to show up on people's radar? Like you said that he had cut
Well,
his
he's
teeth
a-
at 1812. So.
Yeah, well, he joins the Corps in 1806, just a few months after O'Bannon had left. Yeah, lost my thing here. And he has a pretty standard career. He serves on various ships, frigates, brigs. He serves at sea. And so quite quickly.
So the serving at sea part has already put him onto a short list then.
Well, everybody is serving at sea for the
okay.
most part because the Marine Corps is not that big. But he falls into Wharton's belief that the purpose of the Marine Corps, because this is exactly what it says in all of the creation, the laws that create the Marine Corps, the purpose of the Marine Corps is to provide Marines for these ships. And remember, at this point, the Marine Corps has fought two wars, the Quasi-War with France and the Barbary Wars. And in both of those wars, the Marine Corps served basically, well, it served one function. It put Marines on ships. They fought in several battles in the Quasi-War, on frigates, on brigs. They did some landings. All the stuff that I talked about, they did. That's the same thing they do in the Barbary Wars, though I would argue that in the Barbary Wars, we see a new mission where the Marines go ashore with Eton. And that is sort of the beginning of the Marines as a sort of a special forces, right? Some people like to think of it as a landing force, but it's not really. What the Marines are really being there is almost what the mission of the Green Berets is today. They are forming as the sort of the command and control element, the backbone, if you will, of a foreign military force that we're paying to advance our national agenda overseas. In that sense, the Marines of MARSOC should be all over the First Barbary War as an example of, they like there's that should be one of their
the embedded partnership sort of.
Even more than the Raiders, right? Because they have their training teams and so forth.
Right.
But the other thing is, and this is one of the things that Carmick had done, is that the Marines, and also a Marine who's going to show up later, Gale, was guarding prisoners of war in the that from the French that we
On
had taken.
ship.
No.
Oh.
Nope. The Marines are used to guard prisoners of war who are marching through from Norfolk to Washington or whatever.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But the Army doesn't want anything to do with them because these prisoners of war are taken in these naval campaigns. And also the Army is very, very tiny. It barely exists. So the Marines are available, and so they're given this job to take these prisoners of war from point A to point B and so forth. And I bring up Gale because he's going to show up later again. So when the War of 1812 starts, Henderson is a Marine. He's on the East Coast. He's a relatively senior officer. He's been there 6 years. He's not nowhere near like Carmick, but he's senior enough that he can expect to be the senior Marine officer on a ship, like a frigate. And for most of the war, he's frustrated. He's not getting the commands that he wants. He's in various either his ships aren't sailing or he's in because a lot of times we're blockaded by the British,
Right.
or he's assigned to a barracks for a short while to a navy yard, and none of the navy yards that Henderson's at have any major conflicts. So in the War of 1812, what do Marines do? They fight on frigates, right? Every major naval engagement Marines are at. When the Constitution beats the Guerriere, the United States, when all those famous frigate fights that happen, Marines are there. Marines are on the Essex when she goes out into the Pacific, and in fact, out there, and she starts ransacking the British whaling fleet in the Pacific. In fact, a Marine officer is given command of one of those ships, and he becomes the first Marine to command a ship in combat when he's given command of a prize and he captures another whaling ship. Gamble. Later on, he is left in charge of the Marines at the Nukuhiva Islands, and so forth. So the Marines are there. The other places the Marines are involved in is they are part of the naval campaign of the Great Lakes. Marines are at both with Perry at the Battle of Lake Erie, and they're also at the various battles on the larger lakes up in New York and so forth. The other two places is on the East Coast. Marines are involved in the defense of Washington during that campaign. They fight in a couple of different battles. The Battle of the White House, which is not the White House that we think of. It's a White House. But it basically, after the British burned Washington, the Marines and Virginia militia and the Navy set up an ambush on the Potomac and tried to sink their ships as they sailed back down. We failed, but there was a fight there. There's a battle at a creek that the Marines are fighting against the British fleet alongside Barney's flotilla. And then, of course, the Marines are both at the Battle at Baltimore. They're not at the fort, but they're part of the other force that's defending. And so the Marines, in fact, are part of the naval brigade that's on the fortified hill that after the fight at Fort McHenry, all the shooting at Fort McHenry, the next morning the British Army shows up and they look up and they see this big hill fortified with Marines and sailors, and they say, nope, and they turn around and leave. So that's the other place, and they're at Bladensburg, which is the Bladensburg races. The Marines and the sailors at Bladensburg are the only U.S. force that wins any accolades for their part. It's a famous American defeat. That's why they call it the Bladensburg races, because the American forces are running away so fast, except for the Marines. The Marines and Barney's flotilla men hold. The Marine commander's wounded and captured. That's how long they stay there. Barney is wounded and captured. The British actually talk about how tough the Marines are.
Oh, interesting.
So now, it's not true that the British don't burn the commandant's house because of how tough the Marines are at Bladensburg. That's a total myth. But
So what's the truth?
well, the
Can
truth,
you tell us?
I can tell you that it had nothing to do with that. It was just why, they don't burn every building in Washington. Some get burned, some don't. It just happens to be one that doesn't get burned. Nobody's going around saying, "Oh yeah, no, those guys fought well. Don't burn their house." How they don't even know.
Yeah, right.
But it makes a good story.
It does, and there's one thing Marines are good at. It's spreading good stories.
Yes, right.
But here's what's important about Bladensburg. The Marine officer in command is Samuel Miller. He's the adjutant. He had commanded at the battle at the creek. I can't remember the name of the creek now. It's driving me nuts. But he had been ordered to command all the Marines who were formed into a sort of a battalion, 120 men. I tend to think of them as more of the first example of a MAGTF. We don't have air yet, obviously.
Right.
But his group has both an infantry component and 3 artillery pieces. So it's a combined arms unit. And if you know anything about the warfare of this period, they don't combine infantry and artillery into the one unit. So the Marines are unique in this characteristic. So Miller's commanding. The commandant is not. The commandant is back at the Navy Yard and the Marine Barracks. His argument now, the commandant at the time is he was appointed for his organizational skill and his business background, but he's I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name. Can somebody remind me of his name? Do you guys happen to?
I'll look it up. Keep going. I'll look it up.
Yeah, I was saying it just a few seconds ago too, and now it's out of my head. He is intent upon getting the payroll and the records and so forth, and so he's with the Marines in D.C., and he's the last Marine to leave when the British arrive to take the city. He and a group of 4 Marines take a rowboat out of the Navy Yard.
Franklin Wharton.
Thank you. God. Yes, Wharton is the last Marine out the door there, but this is going to be important later, that he doesn't command at Bladensburg, but he stays back and commands the Marines in there. Henderson misses all this. He is, I believe, at Baltimore, where they gather all the Marines, but he's not at Bladensburg, and so Henderson has missed a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, sounds like it.
But then he finally gets one. So Henderson is given command of the Marines on the USS Constitution, and in 1814 the Constitution breaks out, and she starts her last cruise. Now, this cruise is going to continue, and some of these fights are going to happen after the peace treaty is already signed. But it's still a very successful
Right, because it takes forever for anybody to even get notified.
And Henderson is in command of the Marines aboard the USS Constitution. So he's a captain commanding. This is a major Marine command, right? He's got about 50 or so Marines under his command. This is a major command. He's in command when the Constitution defeats the Seine and the Levant. Now, which is a remarkable piece of seamanship. It's a huge victory. The Guerriere people think of as more famous. It's the first one, right? The Seine and Levant are not big frigates, but the ability to outsail and defeat 2 ships at the same time like that. Remember what we talked about, geometry?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's remarkable, because pretty much anybody can get away from you in the age of sail.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going one way, they get,
Yeah, they get right.
None of you can ever go any faster than the wind, right? And so forth. So the Seine and Levant is the last major victory, becomes very famous, and Henderson benefits from that. So Henderson, in the end, manages to come out as a war hero, and he gets all the laudits and so forth. So as we come to the end of the War of 1812, we have several leading Marine officers. We have Henderson, Samuel Miller, Anthony Gale, and of course we have Wharton, who's the commandant. Right away, Miller and Henderson start agitating about Wharton. And it's hard to judge this, but they seem to think that Wharton was not manly enough, that he didn't show courage, and so they bring charges against him.
Wow.
Of conduct unbecoming, and he's found not guilty. But so they bring charges against.
But his
Wharton.
reputation is thoroughly tarnished.
Well,
And that didn't end their careers to do that.
No, exactly the opposite. Marine officers during the early 19th century spend a great deal of time charging each other with conduct on constant courts and stuff, which hurts the Marine Corps quite a bit.
Sure.
And gives the Marine Corps a bad reputation, but doesn't necessarily hurt them individually, from what I can tell. Sometimes it does. And it really depends on at what point in the 19th century you're talking about. Henderson's actually going to really look down on people who do this later on once he's coming.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
But
all right, guys, let's knock all this shit off.
Remember that stuff I did before? We're not going to do that anymore.
Exactly.
That was for me.
But Wharton then passes away. His wife dies. He passes away. Personally, I'm a huge fan of Wharton. I think that he shepherds the Corps through one of its most dangerous time periods, the Jeffersonians. and he really keeps the Corps intact and is able to keep the Marine Corps advancing, keeping it professional, getting more professional. And he's not himself a battlefield commander. Nobody would claim that. But the Marine Corps didn't need a battlefield commander when he was commandant. It needed an organizer and a businessman. He's the one who gets the barracks built and organized in Washington, in New York, in Boston, in Norfolk, and so forth. So the Corps owes. I think of Franklin as kind of the forgotten commandant. He's not the Franklin Wharton. He's not the first one. That's Burroughs, who was a good commandant, but was gone pretty quickly. He was a fervent Federalist. So when the Jeffersonians took over,
He's gone.
he's gone. Yeah, Wharton was a Federalist also, but he got along with the Jeffersonians in a way that Burroughs wasn't capable of. So Wharton leaves, and now we're going to have the new commandant. Well, Miller and Henderson both basically say, "Pick me, pick me." But the president goes with Anthony Gale, purely off seniority. And that's the thing that's going to be important here, is that it's seniority all the way through. Gale has a checkered reputation. He's been charged. He's been court-martialed for financial impropriety. He's got a reputation as a drinker. He's Irish. He also, however, has a reputation for fierce bravery. He's best known prior to this for two things. One was during the quasi-war with France, when the Navy and the Marine Corps was trying to figure out its relationship. Some Navy officers abused Marines or abused their position. And basically, when one officer insulted Gale, he waited until the cruise was over, called him off, shot and killed him in a duel. And the commandant wrote to another officer, "This is how you should handle these things." Burroughs did. So basically, I think I mentioned, well, no, I guess I didn't in the podcast. Prior to the War of 1812, the Marine Corps had lost several officers, none of them in action, all of them to duels.
Yeah, we talked in the pre-show about
Yeah,
this.
the
Yeah.
Marine,
I love that.
I've done a whole lot of work on duels, and basically the Marine officers loved killing each other.
This sounds like a completely separate podcast
Yeah.
and article.
And it's a really
We
fascinating
could really dig
topic.
into that.
The Navy and the Army did as well, but I've been focused on the Marine Corps, and I found it fascinating that it was something like maybe even 10 years before a Marine is killed by the enemy. But by that time, we'd killed several of our people in duels. Like I said, Anthony Gale had already killed one. Dueling was a big deal. So Gale had this personal reputation for dueling, but most duelists also had reputations for heavy drinking.
Right.
And people with reputations for drinking often had reputations for financial impropriety.
Coincidence?
Gale had commanded during the War of 1812. The second thing he was known for is, well, at least by me, is that for some bizarre reason he was reported dead during the Barbary Wars. A newspaper said Anthony Gale was killed, and they said it in this way. They made it look like he was just like really insulted by this naval officer, and then he was killed. It was completely false. None of it happened, but it was reported in several newspapers in the South. And
It's old as new.
I just found that fascinating. Like,
Yeah.
why would they care? Why does this Marine? Because he's an obscure Marine officer. So why is all? But anyway, so during the War of 1812, though, Gale is primarily at Philadelphia in command of the Marine barracks there. The Marine barracks in Philadelphia has always been, especially during the 19th century, one of the hearts of the Marine Corps, right? In this time period, it's kind of serving the function of Parris Island and San Diego, MCRDs. Not completely, because not every Marine goes there, but it's kind of got that function, at least early on. Because the Marine Corps is there up until the barracks in Washington is built. So its first 2 years of the Marine Corps are in Philadelphia. So Gale had become a major. had seniority because he'd been around so long, right? I mean, remember Henderson doesn't become a Marine till 1806, and
Mm-hmm.
Gale was a Marine in 1798. So you can see that
Yeah.
Gale's older and so forth. But Gale's commandancy is benighted from the start. Charges of drinking, charges of conduct unbecoming. Within a year, he's brought up on charges and court-martialed. He's accused of getting drunk and going around town saying he doesn't give a damn for God or the President of the United States, like in a really loud voice. So he is court-martialed. He's found guilty, and he is removed from. So he is the only commandant who has been court-martialed and cashiered from service for cause. He's also the only commandant that we do not have an image of. We don't know what Anthony Gale looked
Interesting.
Oh,
like.
yeah.
We don't
I
have
didn't know that.
we don't have a portrait of him at all. But so that's in and even Samuel Nicholas,
Yeah.
who we have a portrait of him, but we don't have one of Gale. I think Gale was to some extent railroaded, though he probably was an alcoholic. But considering Samuel Miller and Henderson's antipathy towards Wharton and their maneuvering, I think that
Some slander campaign going on there.
somewhat, yes. They're like, why is this guy who did not have active service during the War of 1812 in charge of the Corps now? So there's frustration with the seniority system that is understandable, right? I mean, there's not a lot of places to go.
Yeah.
So Miller is Henderson at this point is going around is commanding various barracks, getting sent here and there, New Orleans, I think New York. I don't remember all of them, but he's going back and forth to these barracks. Sometimes he's in Washington. Samuel Miller, throughout this time, remains as the adjutant of the Marine Corps. Henderson has seniority over Miller, but Miller, of course, has this time in D.C., and Miller has command at Bladensburg. He's actually commanded in the field. But Henderson says, but he's never commanded on a frigate. He doesn't have sea time. Sea time is what the Marine Corps is all about. So even though Samuel Miller has a great deal, he has a background in military command, right? I mean, very successful. He commanded Marines in multiple battles in the War of 1812 on shore.
Never on ship.
Never on ship. And I would argue that Miller's record, though, in the War of 1812 is superior to Henderson's as far as a combat commander. Not through any fault of Henderson's, but just
Yeah.
it's
His
superior.
experience.
Yes.
Right place, the right time. Yeah.
Exactly. So they become big rivals, and that continues. Henderson basically kind of seems to pick on Miller for the rest of their careers. But so after Gale is court-martialed, Miller takes over as temporary commandant for a short while, but the president is his seniority and becomes Henderson.
So again, it falls on seniority, not on sort of operate
Exactly.
or strategic
It
vision.
becomes on seniority.
Okay.
Right. And that's important to remember, is that and that's going to continue, that it's all about seniority. So Henderson becomes the commandant, what is it, like 1820, I think?
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's the right year. And he's going to be commandant until he dies. So the biggest advantage that Henderson has is simple longevity. That's a big deal. He sticks around a long time. That's a big deal, a big advantage, not only for Henderson, but also for the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Because other people aren't being able to stick around. Remember, the Army doesn't get to have anybody in D.C., right? Because the U.S. hates standing military
Right,
forces.
yeah.
So there's no Army garrison in D.C. But there is the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps is there. They're at the Navy Yard. And already the Marine Corps, the band is performing on the President's birthday, performing on the 4th of July. The band is, and Henderson continues using the band. They don't just do that. The band also goes out and performs at society parties.
So they're sort of becoming part of the fabric now
of the national elite
right,
in
yeah,
DC.
yeah.
Exactly. And Henderson's there, and he knows everybody, and everybody knows him. So just by perseverance and longevity, he gets that influence.
So it's more than just the fact that he's the grand old man. He's pretty savvy, it seems like. Like he kind of understood
Politically,
the culture.
he's very savvy, which is fascinating because remember, shortly after, um, he has Adams and so forth, but then you get the presidency of Jackson. And Andrew Jackson is probably the greatest foe the Marine Corps ever had. On his State of the Union address, he says, I'm going to get rid of the Marine Corps. It's useless. He says that at the State of the Union. The Marine Corps is a waste of money. They don't accomplish anything. And it's like, and this is a war hero. This isn't like...
Yeah, I mean, he commanded Marines
at
New Orleans.
New Orleans. Yeah. So when, if Andrew Jackson says something about the military when he's president, Americans listen.
Mm-hmm.
And so Henderson is able to overcome that through his political acumen, which is a very important thing.
Yeah.
And that, so yeah, I mean, I've played up some of Henderson's less attractive qualities, right? The way his ambition perhaps led him to not be as loyal as he should have been to Wharton, for example, or maybe even to Gale. But when it comes to the Corps itself, he sticks the Corps. He keeps it together.
Well,
He
maybe that
protects
ambition,
it.
his fault is also a positive trait.
Right.
And that's what I wonder then too about a lot of these things. I'm looking at some of these images here, especially of Henderson against the Pug Uglies.
Oh, we'll get to that. That's a big deal, but
yeah,
that's in the future.
Way in
the future.
But I guess as we're looking at this, at his more than him just being the grand old man, it's more that he did more than just sit in the chair the longest. There seems to be he's doing things, but then because of his sort of celebrity, if you will, there's the desire to believe in the maybe.
Well, he has celebrity within the Corps.
Yeah, yeah,
and he has knowledge, and he has a certain reputation within Washington society. He's not well known nationally.
Okay,
right. Henderson is he's not like a national hero. Because remember, I mean, he commanding the Marines on the Constitution during the Levant and the Cyan is impressive, but it's
right.
not like national heroes are like Perry commanding at Lake Erie, right? Or Jackson at
New Orleans.
New Orleans, right? So Henderson, in that sense, he's right at the right level for the Corps. But that longevity means that he goes through multiple secretaries of the Navy. So he learns how to manipulate them. And they, start to, it's similar in some ways to the J. Edgar Hoover effect for the FBI later on.
I see.
Right? Where he's head of the FBI through, I don't know how many presidents. It's that same type of thing that Henderson has.
And so, and because of that, then, like I was reading in shameless plug, the Gazette article that came out of the January edition about his ability, almost like an open door policy with the president. So there was an issue with this. I think it was one of the heads of the Navy, sort of giving one of his officers a hard time, and he's able to basically walk into the president's office and say, no, we're not doing that. And the president's like, yeah, I guess you're right. You probably don't need to do that.
He does have some influence, depending upon the president, and it's influence that he earns over time. And so he can maneuver through Washington like that. I wouldn't say that he's often able. I mean, he's still basically under the thumb of the Secretary of the Navy to a certain extent, or of the president. But some of the ways that he's savvy, for example, is so his focus is that the Marine Corps is tied to the Navy. So that helps keep the Navy on his side. and that's important because what happens after the War of 1812 with the U.S. Navy? Well, on the one hand, they start building finally ships of the line, right? We don't have just frigates. During the War of 1812, we started building ships of the line, these big, basically the battleships of the time period.
Mm-hmm.
We start building them now. Of course, they're also obsolete at this point, and they almost barely get used, and they don't really perform any function, but we build them. And the reason we're building them is because the War of 1812 proves that the Navy can win. Literally, when the War of 1812 starts, the president's plan is to keep the Navy in the harbor. And one of the arguments that the Jeffersonian Republicans had against the Navy was they said, we're just building ships to give the British. That the Navy's just going to go
Yeah.
out, lose, and then the
them,
British will
right.
take those ships. And they do in some cases. The USS President, one of the big super frigates that we build, sister ship to the Constitution of the United States, she is captured in 1815 by the British. And the British not only turn her into their own ship, but they make her the flagship of their Canadian squadron. And when she finally rots away, they rebuild her exactly, name her HMS President again, and continue keeping her in Canada as a bit of an FU to the United States. So as much as I'm, as you can probably tell, somewhat anti-Jeffersonian, they did have a point.
Yeah.
But the War of 1812, all the other victories, right? We lost the Chesapeake, we lost the president, but all these other fights, and we lose the Essex, though she's really outnumbered. All these other fights, we win. And the Navy really proved its value in multiple ways, which goes beyond the scope of this discussion. But the Navy proves itself in a way that the Jeffersonians are like, well, we got to have a Navy. We were wrong. And so we're going to build a Navy. But what else happens, and what has started to happen in the 1820s? There's both political developments and there are technological developments. The technological development is steam engine, and that changes everything. Now you start to get ships that have a steam engine, and now you can point and go.
Yeah.
Right? The other technological development is the Dahlgren gun. They develop long-range artillery pieces. So there are two frigate-sized sailing ships from the 19th century that are still intact in the United States. USS Constitution and USS Constellation.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to both. Constitution is up in Boston. She's
Yeah.
beautiful. It's the original Constitution. It's the one that was there. She looks like she did basically around 1814 or so. 50 guns. Class as a frigate because the way that you class ships was according to how many guns they have, right? Frigates had 20 to 50 guns. Ships of the line had basically 50 to 100 guns.
Okay.
And then they were different rates, right? A sloop had 20 or fewer guns. Now, the other warship is USS Constellation. She's in Baltimore. Beautiful ship. She's built in 1854. There's a bunch of controversy about it because the Navy at the time was not getting money from Congress. So they didn't say they were building a new ship. They said they were repairing the old Constellation. And then they used that money to just build a new ship. So
Nice.
people for a long time thought that
Appropriations.
Yeah.
for a long time, they thought it was the original Constellation, but it's not. It's an 1854 brand new ship. But she's the last sailing vessel, pure sailing vessel, built by the United States. She's the same rough size as the Constitution. She's actually much bigger. If you go on board her, you'd be, if you've been on, I was on both of them within a year for my research, and the distance, the amount of, well, the amount of my son, who's 6'3", was really like, but on the Constellation, you actually don't have to feel quite so tiny. But she's a sloop because she's only got 20 guns, but she's got twice, maybe 5 times the firepower actually, and her guns shoot 5 times as far because they're rifled Dahlgren guns, not the smooth bore 32 pounders and so forth. You start to see the difference when you start to see guns being referred to as 9-inch or
Yeah.
7-inch
Yeah.
as opposed to by a poundage. When they start talking about bore diameter as opposed to weight of shell.
Interesting.
And that is accuracy. So now you can fire from further away.
Yep.
If you're firing from further away and you're firing these shells that explode, you're sinking ships.
Yeah.
If you're sinking ships and you're sinking ships from far away, that tactic of boarding becomes more and more rare. As boarding becomes more and more rare, what do you not need? Marines. At least one of their functions goes away. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about the politics of the other function, that keeping order and discipline, here in a few minutes. But that border thing, that becomes less and less important. It never completely goes away, right? But eventually it becomes so rare that today the Navy basically trains its own people to do boarding, right? Because boarding is just like, oh, we're going to go inspect a ship. It's not the same type of thing. And the sailors had always been involved in boarding. They just realized, well, we don't really need Marines now also. Though there are still boarding operations like that in the Gulf War, for example. When we were blockading Iraq, boarding operations were conducted by the Marines afloat.
I think the MARSOC it's one of their missions now as well.
Exactly,
I want to shift gears a little, change directions. And let me ask you, why would a Marine today benefit from learning about Archibald Henderson and his time as the Commandant?
Well, for one thing, the Marine Corps today is in danger. The whole DOD is in danger, right? From budget cuts, we've always been in danger. Technically, there's a law that says, there has to be a Marine Corps. It has to have this many divisions, this many air wings, and so forth. But laws can be changed. And the Marine Corps, if the Marine Corps wants to continue to exist, it has to prove that there's a reason for it to exist. And that means you have to understand the environment, the military environment and the political environment. And that's what Henderson was so good at. As I mentioned, we would get back to this changing the order of discipline idea, right? The other thing that changed is that sailors became citizens, right? The Navy started, and steam engine sailors became highly skilled people who stayed in the Navy. And the Navy officers said, hey, I can lead men without having a Marine to shoot them if they don't do what I tell them. I can be a leader. Navy officers had always believed that. That had led to a lot of controversy. And we didn't have mutinies like the British did because the British, of course, had basically the press gang where they would go ashore and force people into the Navy.
Yeah.
We didn't have to do that. And we generally paid better. Conditions were mostly better. And so there was one mutiny, ironically led by a midshipman who was the son of a Secretary of War. But Henderson kept saying, hey, you got to keep Marines around because, look, there was that mutiny. It's like, well, yeah, maybe if we don't send politician sons to sea it. He thought he was
words to live by.
Yeah, he thought it was going to become a pirate for some. He had basically read Treasure Island too often, I think. But the Navy, what the Navy wants, and Henderson doesn't quite pick up on this, but eventually the Marines realize it, is that, okay, so we don't need you for boarding parties anymore. We don't need you for order and discipline anymore. But we still need landing parties. In fact, we need them more than ever. And that's where the Marine Corps is going to start to come to the fore. It's going to take a long time. It's not, and in fact, the Navy is going to realize it before the Marine Corps does. But that's what's going to start to be pushed forward, that we need these bases, and the way we keep and hold these bases is with Marines.
And I think to that point, as we look at, expeditionary advanced basing, force design, those sorts of routes that were established, even if you don't necessarily have a lot of practical application in that, you've set that as a foundation for the culture. So that now when we start talking about amphibiosity, Trademark Vic Rubel.
Nice.
But when you start talking about what it is that we do, soldiers from the sea, projecting forces forward, you're not speaking in a language that we don't already understand. Because hundreds of years ago, even if they didn't necessarily apply it, they started establishing it as a core function and a fundamental to our existential sort of mission statement, right? I mean, am I overstating
if we
that?
look at Henderson's life again, after one of the things that he is famous for is fighting in the Seminole Wars. In the Seminole Wars, basically the Seminole tribes that were made up of both Native Americans and both escaped slaves and descendants of escaped slaves in Florida, mostly in the Everglades, but throughout the swamps of Florida. Henderson is famous for taking a battalion of Marines down there. Part of this is that political thing. Jackson wants to fight the Seminoles, right? Jackson is all about Indian fighting, and he's been pushing what became the Trail of Tears, the Indian Removal Act. The Marines had already, under Henderson, been involved in that. They didn't have enough federal agents to lead these various groups, and so Marine officers are sent down there. And it's fascinating because you see these letters from Marine officers who complain about how they've been given this money, and they've been ordered to take these tribes of Native Americans west, but the tribe, the Cherokee, for example, many of them owned slaves, and their slaves wanted to stay with the Cherokee because they generally treated the slaves better than the
American property owners.
Yeah,
and stuff.
exactly. And so they complain. He complains about the slaves being stolen as they're trying to move through, like New Orleans and so forth. But so Marine officers had been pulled off of other duties, or there were always more Marine officers than there were positions. They were kind of used as a pool of messengers, secret agents, and so forth by the presidents. There were probably like anywhere from like 5 to 12 Marine officers around Washington to just kind of be, because remember, the government is small. We don't have a lot of like.
Oh, those halcyon days of small government.
Well, I don't know about halcyon, but they needed they had jobs that needed doing, and they didn't have people specified to do them. They didn't have enough Indian agents, so Marine officers were sent. But then, and Henderson is ingratiating himself because he's trying to convince Jackson, hey, you don't want to get rid of the Marine Corps. Look what we can do.
Right.
And part of that, after he had basically kind of defeated Jackson by Congress holding on to the Marine Corps against Jackson's will, he says, hey, we'll go down here and help you fight the Native. The army is too small for the Seminole War. We can add a regiment of Marines. And Henderson himself goes down and commands the regiment in the field. On the one hand, this gives Henderson a chance to command, right, that he didn't have in the War of 1812. Though he brings Samuel Miller with him as one of his subordinates, which I think is kind of interesting.
Nice.
And then he leaves him. When Henderson's done, after he's got the glory he wants, he leaves Miller down there for another year, and he goes back to Washington.
Yeah, because it went on for like 3 years.
Well,
right?
even longer. It technically doesn't end.
That's right. Yeah,
the Seminole Indians never surrender. They don't lose.
Yeah.
But what we often forget is that while Henderson is doing that, where the Marines are acting as a reinforcement for the Army, is that there have always been Marines in the Seminole War already. They were there before Henderson gets there, and they're there after that battalion leaves, serving with the Mosquito Fleet.
Yes.
The Navy ships going in and out, the little boats going into the Everglades. Because the Marines are inherently, like you said, amphibious. We're always on that border between the sea and the land. And that's one of the things the Marines need to think about, and why I get upset often with old Marines bitching about, excuse my French, force design. It's like, hey, we are a naval force.
Yeah.
I recall when I first came to History Division, I was shocked when I got a letter from a Lance Corporal in Iraq who was a friend of mine, much younger than me. Obviously, he was a lance corporal in Iraq, but he was in the artillery, and he was upset because instead of manning guns, instead of firing artillery, he was manning a machine gun for convoy duty all the time. And he was like, I don't know what we're doing here. This is what Marines do. Marines don't do counterinsurgency. And I'm like, what are they teaching you at boot camp about the history of the Marine Corps? Marines do this.
Yeah.
We did it in the Seminole Wars. We did it in Nicaragua and Haiti. And yes, we do this. That is one of the most
combined
Marine
action
things.
platoons in Vietnam.
Exactly. Yeah. So but I also discovered Marines who would spend their entire career and they had never been to sea.
Yeah.
Whereas when I was in the Corps, I got my crossing the line. I had my blue nose. I went to sea on 3 or 4 different ships. So that blows my mind that there were Marines early in the 21st century who didn't realize that who thought of the Marine Corps literally as part of the Army.
Yeah.
That, you don't go
just
to sea.
Another land force.
No, we are a maritime force. We are a naval force, not just a land force. So, though that's definitely a Paul Westermeyer thing, not a Marine Corps History Division.
Disclaimer.
Yeah, we disclaim the thoughts and expressions here are definitely confined to this room only. But no, that's extremely fascinating, and I think those are good words to live by. Obviously, Archibald Henderson, over 50 years as a Marine, quite literally died sitting in the chair with 38 years as commandant.
Something like that, yeah.
There's a ton to cover. So please check out the January edition of the Gazette. Check out Leatherneck Magazine. We've got a bunch of stuff on Archibald Henderson. Please, he's more than just the ghost of the commandant's house. So please dive in and get your learn on. Paul, thank you so much for joining us on this discussion. The context of this is so great. I love being able to sort of understand the entire tapestry of these Marine Corps legends. Vice just, they did some badass stuff and kicked somebody's ass.
It's good to get that whole
really
picture of what it was
like. We were only
then.
able to touch on that. We didn't even talk about the cannon and the rioters.
We need to bring you. We'll bring you back at another time to get into more of this.
The Pug Uglies.
Yeah, very cool.
I mean, he was like 74, right?
Yeah.
And like you talk about, like undercover agents, right? Like he's
right.
So, all right, but we do dive into this within our literature.
Yes,
exactly.
So please,
read the magazines, people.
Gazette, and then you've got a book coming out as well. So
yeah, well, several books from History Division are coming out, and look for that. And there's already over 200 books that History Division has produced over the years. They're available as free PDF downloads, or Marines can order them online and get sent them. We write your history for the Marine Corps. So
awesome.
Thank you again so much
Thanks
for taking
joining
the time.
us.
Yeah.
Great.
Bye, everyone.
Units all over the world engage in professional military education experiences with the Marine Corps Association's help. Marines learn from historic battles ranging from the D-Day landing at Normandy and Marine amphibious landings on Pacific Islands to the Battle of Marathon between Athenians and Persians in 490 BC, to military engagements in the Korean and Vietnam Wars, to battles which took place in the United States during the Revolution and Civil War. Discussing the operational, cultural, and historical significance of battlefield experiences is an invaluable learning tool for expanding a Marine's knowledge and preparedness for future missions. While the character of warfare changes, the nature of it does not. The opportunity to explore the decisions made or ignored in battles throughout history, the opportunities gained or lost by leaders in past combat experiences, is invaluable as a tool for facing today's military challenges. Learn more about this MCA program for Marines at mca-marines.org/battle-study-packages. That's mca-marines.org/battle-study-packages. Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.